Hey, this is O'Teal. If you're liking what you're hearing, head on over to patreon.com/comesatimepod and get your bus pass for an extra episode every week.
Welcome back to another episode of Comes a Time. I'm Mike.
I'm O'Teal. We had the great Eric Krasno on. What a fun conversation we had.
Yeah, we did. He's amazing. He has a podcast here on Osiris, and it was so nice to get to chat with him I know you've known him for ever and ever, you know? Such a smart dude, such a great, real deep thinker, you know? I like him quite a bit.
Yeah, the pandemic has definitely given us all some different perspectives on life, and the way his life has turned since it happened is really, really cool. I think everybody will get a lot out of it. It shows you how things can go, you know, if you embrace the change and if some timing is on your side.
Yeah. I mean, I used to stand there and watch him play, you know, and just be mesmerized by his guitar playing, and just to get to chat with him is really awesome. So thank you, Eric, for joining us, and thanks, listeners. You guys are the best. You're the reason why we do this. You can find us, if you want more, at Patreon. Each week, O'Teal and I do a bonus episode, patreon.com/comesatimepod. And like Eric, we're part of the Osiris Network, which is tons of amazing music and culture podcasts. So head to osirispod.com and check all those out. Enjoy this episode. Thank you, Eric, for joining us. And we'll catch you guys next week.
Peace. What's up, Kraz? Good to see you, brother.
Good to see you, man. It's funny with how much dead time there is now, or not even dead time. It's non-social time. I look forward so much to doing things like this, because it's just me playing my guitar or, hanging with the baby, which I love, but hanging out with friends, especially music friends right now is nice. So I appreciate you inviting me on.
Absolutely, man.
Happy to have you on. We hung one time 1,000 years ago at Toad's Place in New Haven.
The
legendary Toad's Place, which I was freshly writing for Relics magazine, and I kind of would guerrilla interview everyone. I would just any show I could go to, I would just hop into the green room and be like, hey, I'm here with Relics, and just start asking questions and hanging out. And I think I did that, so I apologize.
I probably welcomed. I was probably like, come on in, dude.
You were, man.
I hope I was. That's usually my vibe.
You totally.
Yeah, Toad's Place we actually had some good shows in that place. It's funny how sometimes you hit that right combination of dingy and vibey. The Wetlands was another one.
Absolutely. Yep.
But Toad's Place, I feel like we had good gigs in there. It's I never can equate exactly why, because I don't think the sound was great. And I remember it had this weird, for a while in the later years, it had a fence. Do you remember the fence?
Oh, of course. Yeah. So, O'Teal, did you ever play there? Did you ever play?
When you said the fence, it brought it all back.
Yeah.
Yeah. It had right down the middle of so if you're on stage and you're looking straight at the soundboard, which on the other side is the stairs down to the green room, a net would drop on 21 and over shows. Yeah. So 21 plus was on one side of the net, and 18 to 21 or whatever under 21 was on the other side of the net. And the goal as a kid was to we looked at that net how do we get under the net, or how do we get around the net? You know what I mean? And we made our way.
I kind of remember having an existential dilemma on where to put my mom. I was like, should mom go? Because behind the fence is a horrible way to watch a show, but in front of the fence is dangerous in New Haven, because it's all college kids being woo, getting hammered. I was like, maybe we maybe we put mom on side of the stage or something. I don't know, but I can't remember what actually happened in the end.
I am so happy I had that place growing up because,
Yeah.
I mean, and it was such a cool. My dad saw the Who there after they played the Coliseum. Everybody but Daltrey showed up there and went on with like whatever local band was playing. The Stones, Dylan. I mean, I saw.
They really they all played Toad's Place.
Yep. If
I
you
do
walk
remember posters on the wall that had like a bunch of legendary names, but I wasn't sure how like real that
it was. Yeah, the Talking Heads
Wow.
would play. The Stones did like in between Boston and New York. I think they did a stop there.
Crazy.
It was just so neat because you never knew. I saw Beck there in the early days, Jane's Addiction, like, and then I mean when there was that era when the Evans brothers were on, we talked a lot about like that era, that first Bonnaroo, that early festival era.
Yeah.
When like I would be able to go down to Toads and see you guys one night, Soul Live the next, Schofield the next. Like, I mean, it was just such a like a golden age of catching
that was a great time. I had Schofield on my podcast, and we got really deep into how me growing up, there was the eras of like the late 60s, early 70s of like, oh, I wish I lived then. And for him growing up then, he was like, I wish I was in like the 50s, like the Miles Coltrane. I mean, I kind of like, there's many eras for me that I'm like, oh, New York in the 50s, San Francisco in the 70s. But, I think what's happened during quarantine is like, I'm not going to compare like our scene really to those, but I will say that I've had such incredible experiences. And I think actually having you, Oteil, on my podcast brought a lot of that back of like, there's been a lot, and it's been a time to think about it and reflect on it and kind of like, I think that the appreciation coming out of this is going to be huge. For playing again and kind of appreciating just like my friends and the scene that I'm a part of, and so yeah, it's interesting to kind of look at it that way though, and then the other thing we discovered is that Schofield played with Soul Live a lot in those early days, and he is the exact. When we did the interview, or I forget exactly how we figured it out, but Marcus King is the age I was when Schofield was playing with me, and I'm Schofield's age now. You know what I mean? Which is like, so it's this crazy parallel because I had them on right around each other, and it blew my mind that I'm like, I'm Schofield's age, because we were like, whoa, that's an old dude. You know what I mean? When Soul Live started. But anyway, it's a trip to. I feel very fortunate, man, to be a part of a lot of the things and be around a lot of the people that I've been around, in the past 20 years. It's pretty crazy.
I've kind of found that through other people's eyes, and I'll being the old guy like twice over now. But when someone says, man, my first concert was Allman Brothers, and I'm thinking it's like back in the day, and they were like, it was with you. And I'm like, oh, like I'm their only experience live of the Allman Brothers, it's like,
it's mine.
Wow. And you switch flights. It's funny, but I don't ever put myself in the category of like Wayne Shorter or my hero.
I mean,
you know what I mean?
I never will, but but
other people
Schofield,
see.
Schofield was like, well, I saw Hendrix. He saw Hendrix live, I think at Central Park, and he like quit. He was like, I quit. Of course he came back, but he was also like, it was like a realizing moment that I'm like not a rock star. I'm this, I'm something else.
Yeah.
Which I think is something that's really important. I've been talking about that lately. Like I think in the internet age, there's so much comparison and competition. When people really need to, I have to train myself to just take inspiration from like watching like a 12-year-old rip, you know what I mean, on YouTube, rather than be like, I quit, because but I think for younger people, it's hard, man. It's like you see these perfect people on Instagram because they paint this perfect picture. And like people's lives now a lot of it is so social media, especially with quarantine. But yeah, that's like, it's like a fine line between like using these amazing other people as inspiration versus like competition.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like, speaking of like even Schofield, like I found him through A Go Go, the album with MMW, which is,
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, it's up there with like some of the greatest albums of all time. I mean, I really do. I think it's like I put it with like Kind of Blue in a way. Like it's just his, and then to be able to now dive into all of the Schofields that he was is an exact, testament to what you're saying, that like we're able to quarantine, and through this podcast and through chatting with Oteil and some other friends, like I clocked like a lot of hours on Spotify in 2020, just like walking and listening and getting deeper and deeper into like Alan Toussaint and Little Feat. And that would bring me to, Professor Longhair and all these other things, like stuff that I've never, and it all circles back to somehow that guy played with this guy who played with Schofield, who played with, and it's great. Like you said, we're all like kind of hands on the clock at this point now, and fans and musicians.
Right. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was talking about how I kind of like discovered Dylan later. It was like everyone knows Bob Dylan, but to like kind of I feel like there's like timing in your life where you need a certain music, and I feel like I stumbled, like I always knew Dylan, but I was always like, not my favorite singer, not my favorite player. But as I got to appreciate writing and lyrics like more and more, which I feel like is something that's just been evolving my whole life, I discovered him and went deep, and all of a sudden was like, oh my, I really understood the genius, but it was right when I needed it. And I forget where I was going with that actually, but but I feel like there's timing for all these different things to happen, for me. And like the Grateful Dead music was huge, like in that way, where I discovered it before I was really a musician. And then it came, I think Oteil and I talked about last time we spoke, it kind of came back around right when I needed it. You know what I mean? But I think the first time I discovered the Grateful Dead, it also was a gateway, like you're saying, to like so many other music, because as great of writers as they became, their early years, they were playing all this old blues music and they were kind of like here's the best of like American culture, here's blues, here's like early rock and roll, here's like country, like the best sides of country in my opinion. But I know what I was trying to say in the beginning is that someone was like, "Oh yeah, all along the Watchtower, Dave Matthews," and I was like, but I'm trying not to be that guy anymore that gets mad, because I probably was like, oh, Love Light, Grateful Dead,
right, yeah,
and then discovering it was Bobby Blue Bland. But like that's an interesting piece too, is like a lot of music, whether we like it or not, is discovered like through these modern versions of these songs, but it actually leads to, Soul Live did that. Soul Live played in front of like this jam band crowd who didn't know that when we started the band, it was like Grant Green and Lonnie Smith and all these like organ bands. And I remember back in the day, we used to send out remember the newsletters? I'm sure ARU did it, the little cards that had all your dates on it. Your tour dates. Every time we would pick albums, and we would put them on the other side, so you could see like Yusef Lateef or like Grant Green or whatever. And we really did find that like people would come to our shows and be like, "Oh, I discovered Lou Donaldson," or "I discovered, Melvin Sparks." So I think like in a perfect world, these different generations help people discover, the ones before them.
It's for the curious, I guess life itself is really for the curious. A fan said to me recently, they said, I don't think you discovered the Grateful Dead later. I think the Grateful Dead came to you when you needed it. And I was like, wow, that's deep. And also precisely true,
really.
It's really been, so I always, of course, I always see something mystical in the timing of things, why things happen for you right when you need it.
Right.
Is that pre-programmed, or is that like a gift, or is both a gift? Like,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, Teal, you
Yeah.
kind of had the same experience that Eric did though with Dylan, right? Like you never really were like early on. Were you listening to much Dylan?
mm-mm. No, I was more into Joni Mitchell,
Right.
and yeah, but like Eric, like when you start writing, then you start appreciating it. Like, it's funny when you said that about Dylan, you were like, not my favorite singer, not my favorite guitar player. I was like, actually, he's neither. I mean, he's
Right.
fine at both, and actually, in one sense, like the Colonel Bruce sense, I think about, he's great at both.
Right. Right.
But that's not the thing. The thing is this mind, this writing.
But I also feel like, in a weird way, his presentation is almost like so you listen to the words in a weird way. Like you wouldn't want to hear. Well, I know actually his covers are great too. He's one of those guys that the covers are great too. But like certain songs, it's like the way he delivers them too. I actually have grown to like his voice. I think it was like in the beginning, I just wanted to hear, Stevie Wonder sing "Blowing in the Wind," but which is also incredible. But it's interesting. I saw this movie the other night called A Night in Miami, which I don't know if you guys seen that by any chance or heard about it. Anyway, it's about how it's like kind of a twist on the night that Sam Cooke, Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and Jim Brown get together, and supposedly it's the night that Cassius Clay becomes Muhammad Ali. And there's this conversation between Malcolm X and Sam Cooke about, Sam, you need to make songs that uplift our people, and say he starts playing Sam Cooke's records, and they're all like "You Send Me" and like all his love songs, like Cupid, and he plays him "Blowing in the Wind" by Bob Dylan, and he's like, why does it take this white guy to make the most poignant song about our people? And I just thought that was like kind of an amazing moment. And supposedly he then wrote "Change Is Gonna Come."
Yeah.
Wow,
Which
no
was
kidding.
like his moment of like Sam Cooke, who, was hugely respected, as in the black community, but it was like Malcolm X that was like, you have the voice to make change. Why aren't you doing that? And then he puts on that record. I thought that was kind of crazy.
It's
But
super
anyway, it's a
cool.
good movie.
I'll have to check that out. I listened to too much. Like I listened to Dylan too young to not really understand the social constructs that he was talking about, and the characters in the songs I didn't realize were real people until later on when I started to look at, history. Like
Right.
Medgar Evers, I didn't think I didn't know that was a real person growing up.
Right.
10, 11, 12 years old, and I'm listening to this like double-sided tape of Dylan, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then I get to go back and be like, oh, the music that I listened to was teaching me about history. Like, lucky me that I like smart music. You know what I mean? And it does find you sometimes the same song, like the same book, or like, you go back to it at a later point in your life, and it's like looking at a magic eye puzzle from like another angle. And seeing
Absolutely. I mean,
that's
when
what's so great about art.
when I first discovered the Grateful Dead, I really think it was more about, first of all, my brother was into it, and I was like, my brother and his friends were all there was. It was like, they're the coolest people on earth, and they would bring me, I was very fortunate, and O'Teal can relate to this, of having an older brother that was, going to show me what he knew, you know what I mean? And he brought me to shows and stuff, but it was so much about the community I didn't know about. And I did love the music, genuinely, but I didn't, again, it's kind of like you said, I wasn't quite ready to understand what it all was, especially lyrically, and how hard it is to like do what Robert Hunter did, you know what I mean? And Barlow, but how you like painting this beautiful picture and like this kind of vibe and like this weird like place that you go to as a songwriter is like an amazing gift, but that's also musical and fun to sing, and you know that combination. I'm gonna learn from that forever.
I look at that just like amazing musicians. Like I don't even. It's like you're never going to be. That's as much of a gifted. Like Robert Hunter is just like Miles, but
Totally.
with the pen, like
Yeah.
every once in a while you're fortunate just to be alive when that happens.
Yeah.
To
You're right,
coincide
man.
with that. And
You're right.
Joni Mitchell is like that, man. I saw a thing on her, and they read a poem that she had written when she was like 16 years old. And it's like, oh my God,
It's always been there.
Right.
Yeah.
it's so
Right.
deep, dude. And just like so profound. It's like, wow, she just is a rare human,
Yeah.
Mm.
Very rare.
like,
I
And
always
the way she plays and the way that she like expresses is unlike anyone else. That's funny because like that, the ability for someone like that, it's not just skill. It's like this certain like fearlessness to develop something that's unlike anything else. You know
a
what I mean?
vision too, to
Yeah.
actually even be able
Yeah.
to see that,
Yeah.
to
And
conceptualize.
people thought she was insane. That, it's like Jimi Hendrix. Everyone thought he was completely, no one liked Hendrix. I've been on a deep dive into Hendrix. I mean, no one liked Hendrix. He would like the black community thought his stuff was too whacked out. They were like, "Where's the funk?" And then the white community was like, "Who is this guy?" Like, I mean, eventually, like, kind of in the West Village, he got embraced, but he kind of had to fully form, take himself out of his
Go to
world
England.
to London. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
people were like, "Oh my God, he's a genius." And within months, he was like a superstar.
Yeah.
But it's so funny how, like, in that development stage, most people think if you're creating something on a level that those people did, like, you get knocked down over and over and over.
Yeah.
And-
People don't
but that
realize it's
persistence-
about Martin Luther King. Can you guess what his approval rating was back then? I mean, when he
idea.
was
Yeah,
25%. He was
Wow.
not. He was hated.
they
much
had
more.
approval ratings back then.
Well, I mean, he was hated. He was hated much more than he was
Oh,
liked.
sure.
Like
Right,
there's only
right.
25% of people like,
Wow.
yeah,
Right.
But now it's like there's I see in the black community, there's a huge James Baldwin resurgence, and
Right.
the same way with him. I heard Cornel West talk about it. Like he would, he was not popular like back then,
Right.
so it
Right.
just goes to show you like history will prove what was the deepest and what was, you have to
Yeah,
wait.
well, I think the people that become these legends, it's like these obviously these genius ideas, but like this perseverance to get like pummeled along the way and still do your art the way you want to do it. It's like, because I feel like there's a lot of people with great ideas and a lot of people with perseverance, but it's like to have both and really sustain whatever comes at you until you kind of can fully envision your thing. I mean, it's hard. It's
Who's
rare to
my
have
biggest
both.
my biggest hero with that is Sun Ra, because he never
gosh, yeah.
got the money. He never got it, never let up. Like,
Right.
and he had, John Gilmore, Miles tried to steal him, and Count Basie tried to steal, like, everybody wanted this guy. And he followed Sun Ra in poverty and just pure art,
Just went, yeah.
for 35 something, more years. Just like I and Marshall's still doing it. Weren't we together? Were we together? What was the night? I'm thinking because it was Brooklyn Bowl.
Yeah, Marshall Allen played Brooklyn Bowl. I don't think
It was a creative. I remember what it was. I played with Billy Martin and Mark Rebo, and Marshall was there. And so Marshall's 98, right?
Right.
He
Crazy.
sits there. Now, you know me, I don't like going on the road. He tells me he's about to start a 7-week tour of Europe. So you can imagine.
Wow.
It's not
98.
like Den Company's going to tour Europe, or even Soul Live would tour Europe. This is like Sun Ra and the orchestra.
Yeah.
Hard, just so hard. Like
Wow.
a long tour that would just kill me. And he's 98. I was just like,
He just
Some
is the
people are just
music at this
made of
point.
other stuff.
Right, right.
That's
Yeah, I
the
look at George Porter sometimes and I'm like,
Yeah.
man, I wish I had the energy of that man, in his 70s. Just and he is happy as a clam, dude. He is up there playing. He has more fun than anyone I know. I just love that guy so much. It's just so he's just that I'm so inspired by that. And I really hope that I continue to get that same joy from music, man. Like forever. It's
Or
amazing.
travel. I mean, because I
Yeah.
think he likes the travel even. He
Yeah.
likes the, I mean, I know he gets tired, whatever, but I mean, he keeps a pace that I can't, I have no desire to keep whatsoever.
Yeah, I make sure that no complaining comes out of my mouth when I'm around him. I'll show up with like 3 flights and overnight and no sleep, and I'll see George, and I want to be like, "Oh, I'm about to die," but I know he's like, "Oh, come on!" Like, I don't even want to hear what his schedule's like. I know he's got like a gig tomorrow in California, the next day in Maine, and then the next, I don't even
Just-
want to start.
That's just another one of his superpowers. Like, I don't even mind complaining because, some of these old blues guys or the old, any kind of music, really, like some of them can just drink and do blow in their 80s and stuff. You're like,
Yeah.
what? Like, how is that?
Yeah.
But they're just made differently. Like George is
Yeah.
that's one of his superpowers is being happy with the roughest schedule. So I'll just go ahead and complain, but he'll pick me up out of it because he'll make me laugh. And then I'll be
course.
like, yeah, I'm a puss, whatever.
Man, but I love that. I love his every time I play with him, and it's like he's never had an off night. I'm like, he's just never had an off night. He's always in a great mood and can like lead the band. I've seen him lead bands where he didn't know half the guys on stage and just take hold and but yeah, he's one of the guys I look to as like a beacon of hope for myself. I'm like, if I can sustain and have fun with this when I'm in my 70s, I won.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Taj Mahal was like that for me. I remember it was a horde, I think, or something, and he did a side stage. And I went and played with him, and I didn't know any of the tunes, man. He just led me through it while singing and playing and cueing some other people.
Yeah.
It was just a fine gig. He was like, great, man.
Yeah. Dude, I actually did a gig with Taj Mahal, and I was the MD for the band. We had all these different artists. And generally, I would like rehearse the band and communicate with the artist and kind of like lead the band. When he came on, he was like, all right, like and it wasn't even like a spoken, first of all, he had his own language, but we didn't even need to know it. You know what I mean? He just knew how to communicate with us. That's some old school shit. Like a lot of those guys, I mean, Chuck Berry never had the same band. It was like he just knew how to lead people through it. And the musicians had to have a sense for what's going on, but Taj led us through the rehearsal like it was the gig. You know what I mean? It was like, all right, and we only did one time, and we had like an hour and a half set for his rehearsal. He just like did everything one time without even talking about it. Just would do an intro and then we'd be in. He might have one comment after, but we wouldn't do it again. It was one time, and then we did the show, and everyone else would be like rehearsal like 10 times through the thing. He was like, no, this is how we do it.
I didn't even get a rehearsal. I think they were planning on doing it without bass. He was like, we could still do it. They're like, hey, O'Teal, come on. I just literally hopped up on stage and he just like,
yeah. I did a
that is
gig
the
with
old
Lonnie
school.
Smith once, man, and I was so nervous, and I never could get in touch with him before the gig. It was a jazz fest. It was like, it was like a long time ago, so I don't even know if I had his number. I can't remember exactly what the lead up was, but I just went ahead and like learned like his like a bunch of tunes. I learned like his old tunes. He had a new record. I learned that. I show up and I kind of wrote down my notes and had a little set list, and I was like, "Oh, Mr. Smith, sir, here's what I learned." And he like kind of looked at it looked at me and just kind of laughed at me basically, and was like, he was like, "We'll see how you do, young man. You know, we'll see how you do." And then we get on stage, and he had this ability. It was Donald Harrison
Ooh,
and Derek Phillips on drums,
yeah.
and it was a tight. No one knew what we were gonna do, and it was a tight show. He just had this ability. It was like almost like he was controlling me, you know, like ventriloquism, like we were saying earlier. Like I was like a puppet, and it was like he could just control what I was doing. I swear, it was really strange, and he just knew how to cue us and had the ability to and every song he kind of would play this like beautiful slowed down kind of version of what we were about to do, so we could clearly hear what was going to happen. But it was beautiful. Like you would think that was part of the show. I mean, it was. But for us, it was like, okay, A minor, all right, C sharp, okay, and then he'd play this nice, beautiful thing, and then he'd be like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we'd all just know what to do. It was insane. Ever since I've been like, what happened? Like, how did that happen? But like I said, like guys like that, it's like, you know, they weren't emailing each other MP3s. You know what I mean? It was like you just had to, you know, you just had to know it was up. And rehearsals were, you know, I'm sure few and far between.
I have one of those where I was supposed to play with Bernard Purdy, and he never sent me any music, you know, so it was Jazz Fest, which I could, you know, we could sit here and talk about Jazz Fest for 2 hours, you know, that's just the best for me. But, so I called him or emailed him, whatever, said, hey man, you got any music? So he sends me 25 songs, right? So I'm like, cool. I just chart them out. You know, I learn it best I can. And I got 13 other sets to do. You know, get there. We didn't do one song.
Classic.
We ended up doing a bunch of Leo Nocitelli's tunes, which is cool because I knew those already.
Right.
So I was like,
that's the great thing about Jazz Fest is you kind of build your repertoire over, like, by year 7, there's enough repeats that you can kind of like go anywhere, you know? Yeah, that's funny. I did a gig with the Funky Meters, you know, Art Neville, Russell Batiste, and George. And a similar thing where, I mean, that was kind of my thing, is I would make a list of songs. This is like, everything's on my phone. And Ian couldn't make the gig. It's the beginning of Dumpster Funk, and it was like right when they started gigging and he couldn't do Funky Meters. And the manager sent me like 60 songs, and I had that list like printed out. And it was honestly, probably like the greatest education of my life was learning the Leo Nocitelli guitar parts for 60 songs. It was like, so no matter what, that was the most valuable and it was only a few days. I like didn't sleep. I remember my friend gave me a ride, and I sat in the back with like a little speaker and like learned on the way to the gig. It was in New Jersey. And we get there, and I show the list, and I'm nervous, like, to talk to Art Neville. I'd met him a couple times, but this, you know, and he I bring him the list, and I show it to him, and I remember he, like, hits it with his finger, and he goes, now I know exactly what not to play. Which was, like, obviously hilarious, and everyone else starts laughing. Russell's laughing. And, of course, we did play some of those tunes, but it was like a mixture of all different things, and it ended up being great. But that was the beginning of a pretty fun friendship with him and the other guys. You know, but
that was best practice for Dead and Company. Because people are like, learn those tunes. I was like, man, after a few years of Jazz Fest, I'll just like 25 at a time. Let's knock them down. You know?
Yeah, right. That was good. See, that was the training. You know, that was the training.
It's good. You also did like a good association, Oteil, right? Like you'd be like, what's going on? Is, you know, you can like Eyes of the World. Like you could kind of like bring in other, like what you paralleled, like you kind of paired up tunes to other tunes, and that's such a smart way of doing it.
I always do that to a certain extent if possible, but it's funny because I know, Eric, you've known me when I was in the before stage, before I was used to learning so many songs, and I kind of laugh now at guys that are just coming into it, because they're like, man, it's a lot of songs to learn. Or if they work with somebody in that sphere and they realize how much they're going to be learning new songs like every night. Oh, hey, let's do this tonight. We'll learn it at sound check.
Yeah.
You know, and now I totally embrace it. And a lot for that reason you said too, Eric, like all the tunes that I learned that never do, that was not wasted time. That's the most valuable time. And it was fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, remember when we were kids and we would just play along with the radio or play along with your albums and learn the tunes?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what got me here.
That's what got me started. But it's funny with the Dead, though. With the Dead, it's like AP calculus, because you got to know, like, okay, what was the last version that was played? And then in the 70s, they did it this way. Who's on drums? Because I don't know if he plays it that way. And like, because when I did Phil and Friends, 60 songs again, or maybe more, to do a 4-night or 5-night run at the Capitol Theater. I had never played, you know, most of it. Luckily, I'd grown up on the Dead, but I learned the record versions and then old versions. Because, like, for me, I grew up on the 70s Dead. Like late 77 was my year. But I liked anything through 80. I don't know, for some, and now I've appreciated the later stuff, but that's just what I listen to, you know? So
sure.
I pulled up, oh man, all my favorite versions of the songs we're going to play and the studio versions. Learn those. I get there and they're like, what the hell are you doing? You know? And they're like, and then I realized I should be listening to Phil and Friends and Further and those versions. And I'm like, oh no. I remember we played Help on the Way, Slipknot. I actually talked to Russo about this the other day. And like, I learned the version from like the Great American Music Hall like thing or whatever. And and the problem is, if you play that version and someone else is playing the Reason version, it's like the worst calamity of music that could ever happen. And I remember like Warren is playing like the other version and I'm playing like a whole step away from him, and it's like sounds like the world is ending. But
all the versions of Help Slip are like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Brutal.
And then you look out in the crowd and we're all just eyes closed, twirling. We love it. You're the only one that's hearing that.
I got another good story from that first run, is that I was glued to my iPad because I had figured out, okay, I can get all of these written out and into my iPad. Had like the foot pedal and the whole thing. And don't get me wrong, I'm still like all about the iPad, but I learned my lesson, not like totally internalizing a lot of the stuff. He asked me to sing Alabama Getaway, and and also that era, that song. I mean, I like that song, but I'd never sang it. The lyrics are really fast and kind of in high key for me. So I'm like nervous as hell. I'm like trying to like learn it, and I'm glued to the lyrics on my iPad and trying to play. And I didn't turn the airplane mode off. And my keyboard player at the time from my band FaceTimes me while we're on stage. And I'm trying to read the lyrics, and I just didn't know what to do, so I just just pressed the iPad. It turns on, and he's like, "Yo, bro, I'm hanging out. What's going on?" I'm like, "Shut up!" And I had to turn it off and like try to figure out where I was. And so yeah. Anyway, modern technology is amazing for this stuff, but you can't rely on it. That's for sure.
Well, sometimes, I mean, boy, I don't know what would happen with Dead and Company if our teleprompters went out. It'd be bad news, dude. I mean, I'm sure they have everything like backed up twice. I'm going on a prayer, man, because if my iPad just fritzes out or something, like I could play it all, but I cannot remember all those lyrics.
You know what's good about it being a Dead show? You could go, now it's your turn, and just turn the microphone to the crowd and let everybody else sing.
Right. Well, that's partly why I was so nervous, because every single person in that entire theater knew the lyrics better than me. The guy singing it is the guy who knows the lyrics least out of the 5,000 people in that room or whatever.
What's so funny, like this, like every story that you guys are telling, and it's like the guys, like these elders that kind of look at you and go like, yeah, take your list and, you know, put it in your pocket. We're just going to play. And all of the Dead relationship fans and the band, it's like we all seem to just get off on that perfectly imperfect it's going to happen the way it's going to happen tonight, and it's going to be okay. Right. We'll still be back tomorrow. And that's kind of the cool thing, that as someone in the crowd, and then knowing that the band is kind of feeling the same anxiety but excitement, that, you know, you listening to the 77, that your perfect estimated isn't necessarily the right homework to do for, you know, it's so amazing. That's what makes this scene so fantastic, you know?
Yeah, I mean, well, that was the thing at those shows too, was like, and the Capitol Theater runs were kind of a special thing with Phil. Like, there would be mostly the same people, and by day 3, you'd realize, wait, the first 10 rows are like all the same people, and they also they're not as disconnected. Like, you go see like a pop show and like no one knows who the guitar player is or whatever, and it's the same show every night, and you leave, and these people are like part of the experience, and they're like cheering me on. They know this is my first run. They're like, you can do it, Kraz. Like, tomorrow night's gonna be better.
Hell yeah,
you know?
man. Totally.
Like, don't worry, night 3, you're really gonna get it's comfortable. You know? I'm like, wow, these people like really know me.
Well, I must have mentioned it on the podcast before, but like at Fare Thee Well, like I'm coming off like however many, like 2 decades of following Fish, and Trey's my guy, and I'm so proud of him, and I'm like nervous for him, like a dad at like the Little League World Series. You know what I mean? And like my kid's pitching, and you see like some of these like grizzled old deadheads that are like, this Trey Anastasio guy, let's see what he can really do. Like, it's probably gonna suck, but what, you know? And it's like, I'm just quietly like, come on, Trey, show him what you got, show him what, you know? And it's just so funny to like, because like, like Jerry is the beacon, and like, you know, like there's just so many things that could go wrong, but we love all of them. But you're right. Like, we're hanging on every note. But even if it does trip up, like I've really early on made peace with the fact that like I'm paying to watch my favorite band practice.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's what seems fun to me. I've been to concerts where it's like, we're going to mix it up a little bit, and that means they're not going track by track of their new album. I love Wilco. Wilco's a phenomenal band to see live, but they did one tour when they released the album Star Wars, and they played the whole album track by track by track by track. And when that was over, they kind of played some of the other tunes. And I didn't love that tour as much as some of their other stuff, because I just like it to be, you know. So
was it like a concept album?
It wasn't a concept album in the sense of like it didn't have to, for sure. Yeah. But I just think it was for them, that's something different. So they only did it for that tour. And then when I saw them on their new album, I was like, God, I hope they don't do the whole album start to finish. And luckily they didn't. But
Right. Yeah, well, I think that's like, you know, Deadheads want to be a part of the experience. And part of that is you win some, you lose some, and you know, having and it's been interesting being in, like, as far as my experience with it, because I did see a lot of Jerry shows and Dead shows with Jerry, but then like watching it splinter and change and grow in a weird way in terms of its fan base, but also to include all these other great musicians. Like watching O'Teal play with Dead Company was one of the coolest experiences of my life. It was like somebody who I've respected so much, and that I've looked up to and learned from, and then this other like world, and just watching them like come together, and the way that you did it, it's just it also made me realize that I can't imagine anyone else doing it. You know what I mean? Like when I actually saw it, I was like, I couldn't imagine. That's like weird. Mayor, it took me a second. I was like, okay, how is this gonna fit? When you got the gig, I just knew. It also was timing. Again, it comes back to timing, because your timing with like also with your time with Allman Brothers, so many different things. And you and I had a long talk about it on that drive to Bonnaroo, I remember. Yeah. And because I had just started playing with Phil like then too, I think. And so it was just perfect. It's like, it was one of those things that just the timing and your approach to it.
I guess it helped me that I watched it happen with Jimmy too.
Right.
You know, because he played that one summer with Allman Brothers, and, you know, a lot of Dickie Betts fans were like, would stand in front of Jimmy and then turn their backs to him and face the lawn.
Wow.
It was real brutal stuff. And so after that summer, he's like, "Hey man, I got a call from Phil, and I'm gonna." This is
Man,
brutal.
take
Like, I
that
love
call.
you. He felt so bad. He's like, "Well, I got my dream gig, but I gotta walk away because it's just
Man.
too brutal,
Yeah.
and I got this other offer." But
Yeah.
watching how that gig, I felt, really transformed his playing in a way that even playing with the Colonel hadn't. Because
Right.
it put these, whenever we have limitations put on us, we find a way over, around, under, whatever. And in that, we find this like pot of gold in a way.
Yeah.
And I just
Yeah.
it revealed something in Jimmy's playing that I don't even think playing with the Colonel revealed. And so
Yeah.
then I started looking at it differently. And that's when I asked Kirk West, I was like, okay, I want to get this. Because Jimmy was super excited about it. He would text me and call me and be like, man, this tune, Blues for Allah, or the record Blues for Allah, there was a bunch of stuff on there he was really excited about. But I still didn't get it yet. Kirk gave me dick pics and all that stuff. But you just have to like learn the music. And then when you learn the tune, I'll tell you a great moment that happened for me and John was when we played this free show at the Fillmore in San Francisco. And all these like old school Deadheads came out. Like, I'm pretty sure the guest list was most of the venue,
Right.
But it was free and you just had to get in first. And man, to see John talked about it in an interview, like some old grizzled deadhead that made his way out of the forest with a tear coming down his cheek. It was just like, it was deep, man. It was really deep. And then you go in the dressing room. I had been in the dressing room a bunch of times, but then you see the picture of Bob, and Bob looks like he's 16.
Right.
And it just hit me for the first time because I've been spending a lot of time with these guys and I know them as the age they are now. And then I look at the picture after having life experience, just like, it was crazy. What a crazy night that was, but you're part of that lineage now too.
I know that picture you're talking about. I saw it when I was there the last time and it hits you. It's like, wow. And also all the stuff that happened in that room and man. Yeah.
I remember playing in there with the Peacemakers and with ARU. ARU opened for Hornsby there, and I've been going through, and actually that night was the first time that Bob and Phil played together since Jerry died. Another crazy story. Phil came out and they asked him to sit in. I think Bob was already going to sit in. And he was like, well, I don't have a bass. I had just gotten all these basses from Modulus, so I had 4 of them on the road with me. And I knew he played Modulus. I still don't know that much about them at all. And I was like, hey, tell Phil I've got 4 of them. And so he walks in. I was like, take your pick, dude. It was like a little showroom. And I have a picture from that night. He played my bass that night. It was the first time him and Bob played together since Jerry died.
Jeez.
It's a trip. It was a trip.
Wow, man.
It's funny, like talking about this now with you, Eric. Now we're on like the other side of that, like we're in the family. Yeah. It's such a crazy thing being on both sides of it.
Oh yeah, it's, but it's been interesting. Like you said, there's all these people now that are such great musicians that have, been a part of it, and like you said, it's transformed their playing and their being, I think, you know what I mean? Like I actually remember that I didn't know that there was a specific era of Phil called the Q, which is the quintet. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's Warren Haynes, Jimmy Herring.
Yeah.
And Jimmy, that first run that I did, Jimmy was out with Widespread. And so I filled his role. Day one, of the gig, I had no idea I was even doing that. There's so many layers to the history and all that. And I kept hearing that night, oh man, like it's the cue with Kraz and da 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 da. When I'm walking out and I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. And then I'm like, what is the cue? And then I ask somebody and they're like, dude, you better like do some research. And then I started listening because like I said, I'd been listening to One from the Vault, Dick's Picks, all this stuff. And then I started listening to The Cue, which is Phil and Friends with Jimmy and Warren, because that's the band. I was basically filling Jimmy's shoes, which is like one of the hardest things to do on the planet. And I started listening because I don't know if I'd really listened to Jimmy playing the Dead. And so I downloaded every show that I could. And Jay Bow, my manager at the time, sent me like this Dropbox or something with like 1 million. And I just started, and it was unbelievable how he played that music.
Yeah.
He's
unreal. He's just such an incredible player to begin with. But like you said, hearing him in that context was like, oh man, I got work to do.
Well,
and,
he fell in love with it, He
Right.
did. It's just like Mayer and all of us, really. When you do the deep dive and you go, it's like a religious experience. You're like, oh my God. And all these other fans are like, yeah, man. That's what we've been trying to tell you. Like
those Phil shows were so jazzy and so like they would start off with these like we were coming in 7 minutes into a jam. You know what I mean? It was like you guys were jamming off stage and just went like, oh shit, we got to be on stage, and would just pick it up where you were 10 seconds ago. And it was just so wild to like hear, like you're saying, like that incantation of those Dead tunes were so unique.
Yeah.
Man, I love this subject of filling the shoes of people
who are filling the shoes of Jerry Garcia.
That one I can't even like wrap my head around. I just can't, as far as the Jerry thing, because it's so, it's also like his approach and his whole thing. It's like almost it's hard to even conceptualize it. It's more like. I don't know. I feel like you can't even touch that, or I can't. You know what I mean?
It's that's the
nor would he
lesson,
probably
right?
want you to. You know what I mean? He'd probably just be like, "You do you, man." You know?
Yeah. But I think again, it's like that you can't really do it. You just got to do your own thing with it. But I think Trey did a great job. John's doing an amazing job. I mean, you can't expect it to be filling the shoes. You kind of got to just like pay your respects to how they did it, how he does it, or how he created it. He's the architect of the whole thing, essentially. And I think the music has become like a real book of sorts. I think Teal and I have talked about that, and the songs are they're timeless. So how people interpret it, I mean, Phil gets off on how you change it and flip it upside down. And, I've seen Schofield play with him and turn it into like Mahavishnu meets whatever. I mean, those guys loved that music. You know what I mean? So like, people like John Schofield, I would be surprised if Jerry didn't listen to him. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So hearing like the combinations like that, it's really cool.
One of the last times I was in San Francisco when I was doing the Punchline right before the pandemic, I went and talked with Graham Lesh for my podcast, and I went across the bridge and I went over to Terrapin Crossroads, and Phil and Crosby and a whole bunch of guys are playing in the studio. And there's all these heads outside, like in the parking lot. You could hear it through the wall, and they're just twirling and just having such a good time. And I'm just like, this is just so incredible. Like the Dead can't die. You know what I mean? Like no matter what,
and
they're going to find it, man.
I don't think it ever will, No. You will see that it'll always live on. There was somebody that I was talking to, obviously not during the pandemic, that was like, there was some statistic. There's always like 300 bands playing the Dead music at all times.
Yeah.
Like every town has a Dead cover band playing at one moment, or you know what I mean?
It's
like
so true.
Night.
I went to one comedy would bring me to all these different towns, and after the last show would end, depending on when like last call was in that city, I would always look up like in the airport on the way to that city, like where's the closest Toad's place of that city, and like who's playing. And I can't tell you how many times in Denver I saw Steely Dan, which was like a Steely Dan Grateful Dead. So it would be like Help, Slip, Kid Charlemagne, like Franklin's. I mean, just the in and out.
That's
like
Bodhi, a new one.
Like
I've
it was like
a lot of,
King Solomon's Marbles into like Bodhisattva. Into like a, you know, like it just such incredible like and it's like Steely Dan, like so
I have
wild.
Crazy, like one of the most mystical things that ever happened to me in my friggin' life. It's so weird you say Steely Dan. That tune Crazy Fingers, you know, it has these changes.
My favorites.
Right?
So
you
beautiful.
know,
yeah.
They're not like, you're not going to just solo through that, right?
Yeah.
The first time I learned this tune, I knew every next change before it came up. And I was like,
wow.
What is so? And I'm thinking, okay, I must have learned this. I must have heard this somewhere else at some point, right? Yeah. And I'm mulling it over in my head because I'm trying to figure out, like, it was so weird. And then one day I was like, oh, I hear Donald Fagen in my head singing this song. The whole melody. I mean, I was like, oh, of course. So Steely Dan must have covered this. And then that's how I knew it, you know?
Wow.
I looked all over the place for any version of Fagen doing that. I have never found it. I don't think he did it.
I haven't. I'm a Steely Dan freak, and I've never heard any of them doing any Grateful Dead. Or
actually, Donald Fagen does cover. I was going to mention this. My friend Connor Kennedy, who's an amazing musician, he's in the newest version of Steely Dan. He started out as in the Night Flyers, which is Donald Fagen's band. And I actually played a gig with Donald Fagen and called him to like make sure I had the parts right, you know? Anyway, they do Shakedown Street.
They do?
Yeah. And
Fagen the new version, the new Steely Dan?
Yeah. So of course I had to YouTube it. It's on YouTube.
I have to check that out. Thank God I was wrong.
Can you text him or email him and ask him if he ever covered Crazy Fingers? Because it would really help me know that I'm not crazy.
I will absolutely find out. I know he'll know because Connor's like a huge Deadhead and plays with Fagen. So any Grateful Dead connection to Steely Dan, I'm guaranteed he's got it.
For years now. I mean, this is like 5 years ago we started, and I've been like, it was such a huge thing to hear his voice, and I was like, oh well, that's it. It's not, it's not crazy.
That's so
You're not
great.
Crazy, you know? And then I couldn't find it. I was like, that was weird, man. But that must have been super cool, man. Donald Fagen, someone gave me a tour of the studio where they cut Asia, and I sat at the board and listened to that song on the board where they cut, and I just started crying.
That music
it's a huge thing for me, that album. What was that like getting the Fagen?
We played, so the band was Will Lee on bass, Steve Gadd on drums. And it was like the most killing band ever. And we did Asia, which was like insane. And then we did the one where I had to learn the crazy
Reeling in the Years.
Reeling in the Years. We had Reeling in the Years. And I was so nervous to play the guitar right, you know, because it starts with that thing, the lick in the beginning.
Yeah.
And we rehearsed it. I played and I learned the whole thing. And then Larry Campbell was playing the harmony guitar part. And then I learned, like, I thought I was so slick. I was like, I learned the whole beginning part of the solo and then just took my own solo from there, you know? But I was like, how can you play this song without, like, the iconic solo? And I nailed the intro, I swear to you, 90 times in a row. And, of course, the time he comes up for rehearsal, I, like, completely fuck it up.
You're
And
like
I'm
Michael J. Fox, like your hand is disappearing.
It was so, and the band kept being like, "Oh man, like you got this, bro, you got this." And like out of it was the Love Rocks show at the Beacon where we had so many artists, and like for some reason that one was the one because I grew up on that solo and that guitar part and the whole thing, and of course he gets up for rehearsal and I fuck it up so bad, like, I'm like, no. Luckily in the gig, I got it, but the rehearsal, and he like stopped. He stopped the rehearsal.
No.
He was like, actually, it go. And I knew I fucked it up, and I knew exactly where I fucked it up, but I wasn't gonna be like, no, I know, I just was like, yes, sir, and then. But yeah, learning that solo, and then and it was a huge one, and that's actually not Larry Carlton. I always thought it was Larry Carlton,
Skunk
and now
Baxter, right?
the name is Skunk Baxter played the harmony part, and the other one was a session guy, and I can't believe it's escaping me right now.
Wow.
But they had 11 different guys play guitar on that song, and try to nail the solo. And it was like the 11th guy. And then Skunk Baxter played the harmony part because he plays that riff at the end with the and Skunk Baxter like learned a harmony part and played it over it. Anyway, I'm gonna get back to you on who the guy was because it's like it was some guy I'd never heard his name before.
Have you ever seen that documentary Hired Guns?
Is that the one where
it's about
Billy
like
Joel's drummer is like heavy
Liberty
in
DeVito?
it? Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
But it's just so amazing that like when you hear about some of these studio guys, like to get the call from Steely Dan was like you're going into the big leagues. Like you had to like that was the band that like if you got called in to do like you better have you better be airtight when you walk in there. So
right.
It's not surprising to hear they had 11 guitar players in there.
Yeah.
So Carlton did play on it. He just was number
7.
Yeah, edit that. He actually did play on it. He's just didn't make the cut. But he did play. It was Larry Carlton on Peg. And Kid Charlemagne too. I think, which also
Songs about
was an
Owsley.
insane solo. I learned that solo too, thinking that was in the set list because we only did 3 songs. No, we only did 2, and we originally were going to do 3. I think it was Kid Charlemagne was the other one, which is about Owsley.
Yeah, Owsley Stanley. That's about the.
No, I didn't.
Yeah. That's him. That's him and his LSD empire.
Yeah, which is crazy. I had no idea. I learned that like during that week of learning the Steely Dan stuff.
The way that so as a kid, my dad he had stacks and stacks and stacks of records, my uncles, and there were certain bands I loved and certain I was just like, Steely Dan was one that, again, I just wasn't ready for. Yeah. And then I remember, I don't know if I ever told you this, Oteil, how I got to be into Steely Dan. I moved out like right after I graduated high school, got an apartment in New Haven, and a buddy of mine came over and I had taken acid for like one of the first times. And everyone was leaving. And I'm like, I'm still tripping. Like, this can't end. Like, I'm alone and I'm freaking out. And my buddy goes, I got you. Before I leave, I'll be right back. And he runs down to his car, brings me up the Steely Dan box set and a Xanax. And he goes, you'll be fine. He goes, just take that and listen to this and you'll be fine. And from that moment on, I listened to all 4 CDs from their box set, start to finish. And I was like, Steely Dan was imprinted on my soul as like, the greatest thing. I was like, thank you for the Xanax, but thank you for Steely Dan. And it's been one of my favorites.
Interesting combo, the Steely Dan box set and the Xanax.
To get to
on top
take
of
the edge
LSD.
off the acid. Yeah.
Right. Well, we got a name for that. You know how like a hippie speedball is like a bong hit and espresso? Like the come down combo or something is the Steely Dan Xanax combo.
The warm blanket. The warm
blanket. There it is. I think that's it. You just came up with it. That's it. But you know what I've never understood is like there's so much, I don't know if everyone experiences this, but there's so much like hate for Steely Dan in like the music world.
Really?
And so maybe it's just I don't know. People love to hate on Steely Dan, and I just don't get it.
Like
You know,
musicians or fans? You're
yeah,
talking about?
musicians, like people, they think it's like cheesy and whatever, or like it's soft rock, but like
Yeah,
to
yacht
me,
rock. It
it's
falls
like
into that. Like,
it does, but it's such a perfect blend of like pop songwriting and like amazing musicianship. It's like I don't know, I don't get it. I don't get
I
it.
think
All I can say
Frank Zappa called them downer surrealism.
Oh,
I
so
remember
maybe
that was
he
like
started it. Maybe Zappa was the first guy to
all
spread that.
man, listen to the horn arrangements on Asia. That's it.
Oh,
Like
dude.
the chords and the movements of the horns. I'm just like, I don't know, man. If you could hate that, I remember like when I came home with that record and the sun shining through the window of the music room and like the album cover and all that, just the sound of those horns. I was just really, I mean, aside from, Gad and Anthony Jackson, whoever like
Yeah.
bad asses were on that record,
Yeah.
aside from all that, it was the texture of it.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Just
I
like,
mean-
Well, also, they were at a time where recording was changing. You know what I mean? Like they had just, I'm not going to say the exact technical things that were happening record by record, but like they were utilizing, they were like hi-fi records. They were
Yeah.
mixed in stereo. They were using these multi-track tape machines. They were like, doing this crazy, amazing production. Where looking back at it, it's like really clean for that era, but it was like amazing. It's what they
Amazing.
So
were,
good.
the production. There's actually a documentary, I think on Making Asia. I haven't seen it in a really long time, but they talk about how they were creating drum loops by sending tape around the room, and they were experimenting with all these new technologies. And I mean, I consider that stuff amazing and genius. And it's like this combination of like musicianship, arrangement, and like technology. And
yeah.
it's
I mean,
pretty
yeah, that-
epic, man. And that song, Asia, like one of the coolest musical experiences of my life was we had like an 8-piece horn section, that band, and Steve Gadd, the drummer from the record, playing that song with Fagan. And the outro, Gadd, like I almost like couldn't play because I was like watching Gadd play the drum solo over those hits. You know, the hits at the end of that song. Oh,
So good.
yeah.
Yeah.
They are absolutely such an. I feel underrated in the grand scheme of things when it comes to musicians. Love them. You know what I mean? It's like that comic type thing that people say
Yeah.
sometimes, where it's like real musicians love Steely Dan, but like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think maybe with like, maybe with Michael McDonald singing sometimes a little bit, maybe it gave it a little bit of like that kind of soft rock feel. How I could see some people would say that, but I think it's just
I don't know. Michael
as
McDonald's
Green
also one of
Area.
my favorite singers. So
He's
I don't know.
phenomenal. Yeah.
I fall on that. I don't know.
I love everything that they. Yeah, it's just.
I like his
unreal.
80s shit. I like everything Michael McDonald. That dude is a beast.
I know I'm becoming much less musically bigoted the older I get because
Yeah.
my kids listen to stuff that I would never have listened to. So like I know a lot more about Justin Timberlake and Will I Am and stuff that I would never ever know, and some of it like so now I just take everything kind of as it comes, and it made me like get a new appreciation for like old, some old disco shit that used to be out, in the 70s or whatever. I just everything.
I actually just watched the Bee Gees documentary. Have you guys seen that?
No, I haven't.
I've obviously had a lot of time on my hands in quarantine. I'm like, oh, you see this movie? See that movie? That one's really good though, and it actually talks about how they got kind of unfairly canceled. It was like the first version of cancel culture. And people burned their records. Like, well, it was really that there was like a moment where people hated disco so
Disco
much.
sucks. Remember the disco
Yeah, but it
sucks
ended-
t-shirts? Yeah.
And then they actually had this demonstration in Wrigley Field where they like burned and broke all the disco records of the era, and the Bee Gees kind of became like the hate, the one where they hated the most. And you actually, and not that I'm like the biggest Bee Gees fan, but when you watch the documentary of like what they were doing, and like they were like real songwriters. Like how deep is your love? Like that's an incredible song. Look, those chord changes and the song. I mean,
the harmonizing,
of course, like the production and his voice or whatever gives it a certain thing. But after Saturday Night Live, they were like too big. It was like one of those things where when something gets too big, people have to hate on it. There's like no option.
They were like how Nirvana was to grunge, sort of. Like they just became like the figurehead.
Elvis.
Yeah.
Right. And I bet Steely Dan maybe had a little of that because they had a lot of hit records. And
they never toured. Like for a while, they stopped playing live for like a good chunk of their career. They were just a studio band, which I was surprised to hear. I was surprised they didn't play more like just unannounced club shows in the city. You know what I mean, or whatever. Like they're just too. Maybe they just felt like they couldn't recreate what they did in the studio.
Yeah, they had so many musicians coming in and out that I'm sure it was hard to like create that live.
I'm just happy I got to catch him live, with Becker at the Beacon when they did that run. And I mean, every year I would go see. I'll tell you, one of the most amazing nights, a New York City night. It can only happen in New York. I'm doing stand-up comedy on Friday night. I have a couple shows at Stand Up New York, which is 78th and Broadway. And I go do an early set. I do a second set, and then I run over to the Beacon, literally run to the Beacon, catch Steely Dan do Royal Scam start to finish.
Wow.
Leave the Steely Dan show, go back to Stand Up New York and do a late set. So I got to do 3 sets, got to see an entire Steely Dan concert, and then drive back to my apartment in Queens. And I'm like, this is it. Like, I made it. I don't think there's anything better than this. Like, I got to, like, it was just such an unbelievable night. It's one of those kind of only in New York things. Can you pull that off,
that's the one thing. And I'm not even going to say I miss New York because I don't want to live there probably ever again. But I look forward to going there and having nights like that. I miss that where like you could bounce around to 3-4 things. Yeah. And like, all of them be at the best of the best. Like you could see, go to the cellar and like see like who, Mark Maron jump up, or like I've been there when Chappelle jumps up. Go to the Blue Note around the corner, see Sonny Rollins, and then like go to the Beacon and see like Allman Brothers. Like that could be a night. It probably was a night.
That is nights. I mean, working at the cellar, I'd be like walking into, I perform there all the time, and Thundercats across the street. Or Bob Weir's across the street. And I'm like, there was like 2 or 3 nights where Bob and the Wolf Bros did like shows at Blue Note.
Blue Note, I remember that, yeah.
And I'm across the street, and I'm working, and I'm happy to be working, but also Bob Weir's across the street. And I'm like, son of a bitch. Like, it's just that double-edged butter knife of, making it work. But
it's kind of crazy how that little area of New York City, like, is just... and it's such a shitty little place, but it's amazing at the same time. I mean, Cafe Wha was where Jimi Hendrix got discovered and his whole life changed. The reason he went to London, Chaz Chandler saw him in Cafe Wha playing some random jam session, which is like right around the corner there.
It's 2 steps away. Yeah.
Those I had so many nights hanging out down there. Village Underground, Groove, Blue Note. Crappy little Mamoons was like, I ate way too many Mamoons falafels, but
the bitter end.
I actually want to ask Mike a question, if that's all right, if you won't mind me flipping the tables, just because I'm so curious about like the comedy scene and kind of like the parallels of like trying to come up in this like competitive nature. I mean, I know that like comedians one of the things I've always wanted to hang at that table at the cellar where all the comedians are hanging out, you know what I mean? And like, totally. There's like no better hang than with like a bunch of comedians, but I'm curious, like a little bit of like coming up in that scene, what it's like to have to compete against each other. Cause I always think like, okay, when we're musicians, we're competing, but we're also like collaborating and we're also in bands together. But like when you're a comedian, you're like a solo. You go on stage by yourself. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm just kind of curious about the competition, like coming up in New York as a comedian.
Oh, well, I mean, I think that one of the things that and I can really only speak for myself, but I think that the offstage hang is just as important as how funny you are and how much you deliver. Like if you are a killer, but you're a piece of shit, it's hard to like, you're going to have that, you know, against you. So I would say that, the goal was always to work at the Cellar. And you get recommended there and you do an audition set on a Friday night, you do 5 minutes, and it's the scary, I'm getting kind of worked up thinking about it because it's been so long since I've done it. But it was, for me, Dave Attell, Okerson, you know, some of these guys that like I look up to and respect so much liked me, and they saw that I had the work ethic, and they saw that they could, trustfully recommend me or bring me on the road, and I wouldn't ruin it. I wouldn't, try to chase waitresses around or, skip out on bills or buy shots for the whole room or whatever. And I think that it was more of kind of just, if you're there because you need to be there,
right.
That people could tell that. I think real recognizes real a lot with comedy. And I think that if you are sacrificing a ton, and if you're laying it all out there and you're not scared to bomb because you're growing, you seem to attract those folks that will help and will see, your work ethic and your just love of the game.
Right.
And that was the fun stuff at the table. You know what I mean? Like sitting there kind of, the table would filter itself out. You know what I mean? Like the table at the Cellar is like, if there were people who would come by and kind of, talk louder than everybody and pat themselves on the back and kind of put people down without like it being in love. Like it was kind of like, all right, well, you won't be here. You won't be here much longer. There's a certain amount of like vulnerability and humility and all that and ball breaking and loving every minute of it. Yeah. But
it's almost like the upstairs at the Brooklyn Bowl. There'd be like like me, Oteil, Kofi, my brother, like the Evans brothers. We all like talking, and then someone would like open the door and look in. We'd all be like, just stop and like, who's that? You know what I mean?
Just praying they don't ruin the vibe.
That's exactly right. And it's funny that you said like, so that room turned into Village Underground became like kind of, there was the McDougal room, and then we would do shows on the weekends at the Wah, which some people didn't really like to do, but I loved them because it's like you said earlier, just being in that room where so many important things happened in that room musically. I'm honored to even be on that same planks of wood, and I'm telling my dumb jokes, and around the corner there's a couple other rooms, and one of the rooms we had was the Fat Black Pussycat, which is the bar above.
I know it way too well.
Yeah. So
way too well. Yeah.
Oteil came and watched me run like an hour of material right before the pandemic started when he was in town for the Brothers. But we would have a night called New Joke Night.
Right. And
essentially what it was an open mic for comics who were passed at the Cellar. So it was kind of us giving us permission to fail. And we would go up with 5 minutes or whatever of like just premises, thoughts written down. And you would just eat shit over and over and over, but we loved it and the crowd loved it because they were there to support us with, I remember times going up and being so nervous with just my one or two ideas that weren't really ready. And I'd look up in the stairs and there's Chappelle. And he's ready to just go on with a pack of cigarettes and like a half a pint glass of tequila or whatever. And he would be up there for like 2.5, 3 hours, no material.
Yeah.
And just go. And then you see other comics start filing in and sitting on the stairs or sitting up in the balcony to like just watch. Yeah. And that was the beautiful part of being in that circuit. I talk about it like it's past tense now because of the pandemic, but being able to learn and just watch and appreciate other people's, watch Colin Quinn just slaughter a room and then kind of have it. And, but sitting there watching like a Chappelle and everybody from elder comics to brand new people to whatever, just funneling in and watching them just think verbally for 2.5, 3 hours.
Yeah.
such an honor. And it's like that you walk away going like Schofield, like I quit. I can never do what he does. But then it's, you know, it's competitive, and you kind of have to not think so much about, it's that whole keeping your eyes on your own paper thing for sure, because who's got management that can get them to do this late night set, or who's got, you know, this person's ear, or who's done this room and who can help you get that room, and how can you help them get this room. And so I think it was just, I tried to do it as like just as genuine as I could, and it helped.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I mean, it to be able to perform with, you know, to have Dave Attell ask me to go do stuff on the road, like I already kind of feel like the rest is just gravy.
And
you know what I mean?
Do you enjoy being on the road? Is that, you know, as a comedian?
This has given me time to think about it. The loneliness I can't stand, because I just, you know, I'm glad I got a lot of my partying, most of my partying out before I started regularly touring and stuff. But being alone in hotels all day and then going and working an hour a night and then going back to the room, it's cripplingly depressing.
Yeah.
You know, I'm married.
I went through that,
you know,
even with band members, so I can imagine like doing it alone.
We've talked about that quite. Yeah, it's awful. I mean, there are some gigs where, you know, the summer before the pandemic, so 18 or 19, you know, the Cellar had a room in Vegas. So you go out and do 7-8 nights, and you're in a hotel room in Vegas, and yeah, there's the other comics that are there, but sometimes you're not like the closest with them or whatever, and you just go work 40 minutes a night.
Yeah.
The hell am I going to do in Vegas for a week you know what I mean? It's like 120 degrees out, and if you don't like gambling or you know, but then also I'd go right from that gig to another week in Atlantic City, and then a weekend on the road in a mall in Minnesota. And it's just so much time alone that when like you just start to lose track of who the hell you even are.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why I love the city more, because you can go do great rooms like Gotham and the Cellar and Stand Up New York and New York Comedy Club and hit all of them and go sleep in your own bed, you know?
Right.
So I think coming out of this, I don't know if I'll ever really hit I did, because it was incessant, and looking at the calendar, the only dates I could see were the empty ones. You know what I mean? Like criticizing myself. But I'm honored to have done what I have done, and worked with who I have worked with, and it's an amazing comedy. That room and that neighborhood and the history, and kind of getting off the train at West 4th and walking up the stairs, and you come up it's incredible. Some of the best basketball that's being played in the world is being played right there at the corner. And then the best jazz that's going to be played in the world that night is at Blue Note, and the best comics are, you know, Ray Romano's getting his new hour set. And I mean, it's just amazing.
I've played the Blue Note maybe hundreds of times, because years ago we'd start doing like 3-4 night runs there, and I was doing before the pandemic, like twice a year I'd do a run there, even when I moved to LA, and that was always the coolest hang afterwards, going to the Pussycat, and there'd be like musicians, comics, everybody hanging out, and it was just exciting, man. Like that definitely makes me miss New York, specifically like those hangs. And it's crazy, because that place has been that epicenter since the 60s. You know, that's where Dylan hung out, and obviously we talked about Hendrix. It's so cool how some of those places are still standing, you know, where it's like that. I really hope that those places don't close down. You know, I know the Blue Note's struggling, but I think it's gonna stay open. But that's gonna be interesting to see after all this, like how things evolve and what happens. I mean, I'm thankful that like podcasting and doing a lot of the other things we're doing. And for me, I love being home. I've never I'm so much happier being at home and creating in my studio. I do miss playing gigs, and I am excited to get back to that. I mean, obviously, if I could combine like, okay, just play in California all the time, that would be ideal for me. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how things come back and change after this.
I think you'll be different. You'll feel different too. I'm interested to see how much we change when it comes back, because
For sure.
you just had a kid.
Oh yeah.
So, like for me, even though it's difficult right now at the moment, but like having all this time with Jess and Nigel and Kavi is just, I mean, he just lost his first tooth,
Yeah.
that stuff is so corny to people, but dad moments that you would almost surely miss if you're on the road all the time.
Definitely.
And I've caught so many of his first. I pulled his first tooth out. He lost his second one yesterday.
Yeah.
So I think I know it's got to be. I'm sure the timing was.
For me, I mean, I almost feel guilty at like how good 2020 was to me, because, obviously I would never wish any of these situations on the world or anyone, but I've been very fortunate, and this my son has like just started eating like actual like food, which is like, we're calling dad, we're calling grandpa, and oh my God, oatmeal, and he's like, those like little things. These little things are like bigger than the biggest gig, you know what I mean?
They are.
In a lot of ways. So I'm I feel fortunate that the timing for me on all of that, and then also creatively being able to, I made an album in my studio during the time where I really got to like hone some different skills and you try to like evolve as a musician a little bit, or as a songwriter at least. And, obviously doing the podcast, I think that's a lot of people are finding new skills or even like hobbies or other like wellness. I know you've been super into biking now, Teal, and some people are like getting more into yoga, and I think the slowdown is going to have a lot of positive effects on a lot of people.
Yeah, I learned how to split wood.
Nice.
I'm very happy about that. Yeah,
nice.
I'm pretty. I'm hoping I won't need that.
Where you live,
totally. No, but it's there's a lot of thought about it, and I've had talks with other comics and other music fans and stuff that it's like, I think I've been able to perform a little bit outdoors and stuff, drive-ins and things like that. But I'm excited to just be in the crowd for a concert again. That to me is the thing. Live music. Look, I love comedy. I do comedy. Comedy's like the thing that I feel is the most important thing that comes out of me. But I need music. Like, I really genuinely, I'll be pushed in a wheelchair to concerts when the time comes. You know what I mean? And I just, being there with the collective, like sigh when the lights go down and the roar when the band hits the stage and the first notes, it's just going to be, people's heads are going to explode, like, I just can't wait.
I'm looking forward to that first Dead Company show again. That's for sure.
Yeah. I am too, actually. Well, man, I came to the Hollywood Bowl whenever the last one was, and I had so much fun, man. Like, I haven't had that much fun in so long. It was just like, and I love that venue too. But I don't know, for some reason that particular night might have been the goo. but man, that was just like, I haven't been able, because also I don't get to like go to a lot of shows. It's usually like at a festival, and I gotta like go run back. I gotta watch an hour, or I can watch a little bit. But that was one of the best shows. And just seeing so many people too, and I know we keep circling back to the Dead. It's like inescapable, but the community of people that I hadn't seen in so long, and that I was thinking about that the other day, and like I can't wait to get back to that, and also the festivals that we do and Lock In and all that stuff. I think the appreciation for all of that has grown and the time at home for sure. Even though I love being home, I will appreciate those moments a lot.
Man, I'm
So
so
glad you were
glad
able to
came.
hang today, man.
Yeah,
Your podcast is incredible, and not that anybody that's listening to our podcast probably they already know it, but for those that haven't, can you tell them a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, I mean, it evolved from I used to do like a guest little show on Sirius XM, and where I would play music, and I started having people call in, and then I started, I think Pretty Lights and Derek Trucks and Warren Haynes all at some point called in, Robert Randolph. And I just like enjoyed, I mean, it's really like when we're on the road and we're at lock-in, some of my favorite parts are like me and Oteil like backstage just cutting it up and like talking. And I always thought that was an interesting part of the whole of being a musician was beyond just the music was like the hang and the personalities, the Colonel Bruces, you know what I mean? It's like, I wish I'd had the podcast when Colonel was alive. Oh my God. But there was like, I just, I love talking to my friends. And I think what happened was I already had the concept to do a podcast years ago. And I did a couple episodes. I did a couple for Relics. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, well, now I'm home, so now's the time. The initial idea before was to also have a performance element, like where they do it in my studio and we perform together. We do a song. And I've done a couple like that before things shut down. I actually did start recording it before the pandemic. But once COVID hit, it was like, okay, let me just start calling people. And it really also in a weird way worked out that everybody was home. You know what I mean? So like, Dave Matthews is not usually just sitting at home. Like, I wonder if I could talk to Kras, but it was like, I was like, hey man, I know you're home. I know you're home, man.
Oh, that's amazing.
So just started getting friends on it, and it kind of just became more than I really expected. I thought it was going to be just, as you guys know, it's like, it turns into something and it's become something that I really cherish as a source of like education for myself too.
Absolutely.
I learned so much from everybody, and it's just a nice like way to get together and have fun with my friends like weekly or whatever, like, since we're all just like locked up in our houses. But yeah, like I said, it's just been it's kind of evolving, and I've been like learning how to try to make it more interesting as it goes, and I'm trying to like now expand and have like more people from outside our music community on there. I love how you guys are really broad in the spectrum, and your guests are really, really amazing on your show. So that's been kind of inspiring too. So yeah, it's been something that it was kind of like a selfish endeavor as like a way to kind of an outlet for me. And, but I get so many messages now about how people have been listening and inspired by different episodes. And so I'm very thankful for that. And like, I think having the technology that we have in 2020, like imagine if this pandemic happened in like 1994, I think we would be a lot more depressed,
A lot of people would be mailing Maxell XL2 tapes to each other and doing their tape tradings. Like that was the only way we'd be able to.
Hey man, tell me about your new record.
Oh yeah, so I made a record during quarantine. A guy named Otis McDonald, who's an incredible musician and producer, we met through Adam Deitch, and he was putting together a compilation for a charity called Song Aid that he had helped start. And this goes back to the Dylan thing, is that the song Man in Me had come on while I was somewhere. This is pre-pandemic. And I completely when you're listening to music and someone's talking to you and then you just have no idea what they're talking about, and you're just like, it was like somewhere in a cafe and you're just like, oh, now I'm not listening to you anymore. That song, oh my God. And then I listened to that song so many times, and then I like just started playing it, and I was like, oh man, and that was right around when my wife got pregnant. So there was like so many different pieces to that song, and like finding the person for me. And initially I was like, okay, so he hit me up, hey man, we're doing this compilation and people are doing covers and stuff. And I was like, oh man, I'd love to do Man in Me. So I cut like this little demo kind of thing of it, sent it to him, and I was like, why don't you add some drums? And he not only added drums, he added keys and mixed it and added background vocals, and we did it all virtual. And I was like so blown away with the product. And then once I got it back, I was like, oh man, now I'm going to redo my vocal and I'm going to do my guitar. And I was like guitarmonies, and I like did all this stuff. So that track is out, actually. You can find that track on Spotify. Eric Krasno, The Man in Me, I think is the correct title. But I just was like, man, I love this dude. I love working with this dude. Maybe this is a way. Because initially I was like going to record like an acoustic thing just in my studio that was a little more broken down. But I was like, man, this dude's a great drummer. He's a great mixer. So I started sending him a bunch of other ideas, and he started doing the same thing. And so the rest of the album is all original songs, some of which I had written previous. And then I just got inspired and just started writing. And as you can hear in the album, a lot of it is like the journey of becoming a dad and all these different things. But I think it's the best thing that I've done personally. I think for a lot of reasons, but I think one of the reasons is I got to spend real time putting it together. You know, like most of the record, I was like in my sweatpants and like no shoes on. You know what I mean? I got to like sit there.
That's
like,
the way to work. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and it's so many times in the past, it was like, okay, you got 3 days in the studio. You got to cut 17 tracks, and this dude has to go, and this dude's leaving tomorrow. And this was like me just doing my parts, and Otis, and he has a studio in San Francisco, and both of us had some time on our hands to work on this, and we were really excited about it. So it became this really cool friendship too, where like when we just started going back and forth, and he has a 1-year-old son. It was like one of those things where the timing was just like epic, because he has all these skills that I want to learn, and I think some vice versa, where he's like a great mix engineer. He can play piano. He's a great drummer. He plays everything. He can sing. And I was kind of doing the similar thing in my studio, but he showed me so many studio tricks and things, and we just started doing this these virtual sessions essentially. And then we eventually found this program called Pedal, where we can do it in real time through our studio gear. So I can actually hear in real time. So we mixed the entire album and did overdubs using a new technology called Pedal.
Wow.
Where we're actually going through our computer in real time. It's kind of insane. And it's great because it's almost better. I did go up to his studio before things got really bad, like in like the lull where I went up to his studio in San Francisco. The other great thing is he has the room at Hyde Street Studios, which used to be Wally Hyder. And that's where American Beauty was recorded. It's where Herbie Thrust was recorded. It's where Tupac recorded a lot of stuff. So many epic albums. So when I went up there to like do some overdubs and stuff, I'm in this room just like, the mojo in this room is like, so all the stuff he did in that room, and then a lot of the rest of my tracks mostly were done in my studio. But yeah, and like I said, he had just had a son, you know, when we first linked up, or his son was like a year old. And I'm having a son, you know, on the way. Yeah. And like, it was just this kind of like, how did I not know you before type of thing. And we talk every day, and we've made so much music. And since like April, I mean, the album is just the first like 10 tracks. We already have like tons of other tracks.
That's so great.
Definitely feel fortunate, for that connection. And then just, you know, for the time that I've been able to kind of spend on it. I mean, it's funny because it's actually not that I spent a zillion hours doing everything. It was more that without the pressure, you know.
Yeah, you're not rushed.
You're not like, oh, okay, got to do this solo just one time. And eventually, the funny thing is, once you take the pressure away, you only need one take.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Then I was like, oh, it feels good. And then I was like, oh, wow. And then I got really into I took a cue from the Allman Brothers, but it sounds very different. But like I do a lot of guitar harmony. Like my last record, I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a record that's really based on the songs, but I didn't really make a lot of room for the guitar playing, which is like, So this
You're talking
time
about Telescope?
Yeah.
Love
So
that.
like there's guitar in it, but not a lot of like extended like guitar melody solos. And this one, I still have like it's still more pop in the way of Telescope, but I still think that the Allman Brothers are one of the best bands of all time of like creating these like memorable. I'm going to call them pop songs because they're on the radio, but it's like it's soul, it's blues, but these incredible hooks with these like guitar, like beautiful guitar harmonies and stuff. I think my stuff's maybe a little more like minor, than the, but like I started doing this thing where I would play a solo. And then like you'll hear on the Man in Me song was the first one where I did it, and then I just went back and started harmonizing certain parts. And then what in turn it made the rest of my solos on the records like slower and more melodic because I was thinking I want to play. I wasn't sitting out and writing anything out or arranging it, but I was like, I want to be able to harmonize this later.
Yes.
So what it made me do was make my solos like more melodic and a little bit slower and a little bit more memorable. And then some of them I didn't even harmonize. I was like, oh, this sounds great like this. But it was that concept of like thinking in that way. Like I want to think about that this solo is going to be played by me and I'm going to do in the studio, I'll double it or harmonize it. But live, I'm going to have this dude with me. So I always kind of like imagined my guitar player that plays with me, Danny Mayer. I kind of would always like imagine him there with me. It sounds kind of weird, but I'm like, I'm going to play something that someone can play with me, So cool. So that there's a theme of that throughout the record that the solos have this like arc and I harmonize a lot of them. Nice. Along with like the singing, I think got a little better because I've been kind of working on that and figuring out where my range is, trying to expand my range, but also trying to like write for my voice, which was something I didn't really know how to do before.
Me too. I have an easier time singing Jerry's tunes than mine. But I was just writing like from this is the melody or this is the whatever. It's like, yeah, but you got to sing it. Like,
exactly.
You got to write for that too.
I had come from like writing for other people, and then so figuring out where my voice like works, which is a pretty small range, but I think it, and it's getting it's getting better. And I took like my first like real vocal, like Zoom vocal lesson kind of recently, and like actually learning a little bit of technique has been helpful. And because it's very different than guitar. I mean, it's like in terms of, obviously the physicality of it, but one of the things I learned is like when I play guitar, and I play like the notes that have the most feeling, I don't breathe at all. In fact, I like suffocate myself.
Oh, wow.
I like scrunch my face up and I go, ugh. And when my vocal teacher saw that, he was like, wait a second, hold on. We need to, first of all, breathing is all you got when you're singing. Because when I would sing and I'd hit like a note, it was always like, like he's like, first, if you're squinting, that means you're clenching up your throat and your neck. And if you're like doing these scrunched out faces, so try, and I'd never thought about that, you know what I mean? And I'm sure like, if you're an amazing singer, that maybe doesn't matter as much, but for me, I need every bit of air I can get.
Yeah.
So that was a huge game changer for me. It was like realizing I need to be relaxed when I'm singing, especially when I'm singing higher notes. Because what happened when I was trying to sing higher notes, I'd clench my whole throat up and they would go away,
Wow.
So, if you watch like Alfreda, right? Like she's pretty much, right? She moves around, but you can tell
she goes like this.
Yeah, right. But you can tell
up.
she's freely moving around, Like watching her sing.
Dude.
Like that's like some I quit. Those are some I quit moments.
Yeah. She's also a trained opera singer that's this Philharmonic and then that Philharmonic. Yeah, she's a technician, man, when it comes. She's the one that told me, she was like, oh, all this stuff about drink something warm. She's like, oh, no. She said, get you something that's with crushed ice in it.
Oh, yeah.
And I realized that. I was like, that's true. Like, people say, put your face in a hot pot when you have a congestion. I'm like, no, when you walk out in the cold, that's when your nose clears right up.
Right.
It just shrinks your vocal cords up when you drink that. And she says, I like it carbonated. Like Coke and crushed ice. And she just
interesting.
Yeah, and then she can hit the moon.
Wow.
Yeah. It's so funny, the things I love, just like learning so many of these things later in life, and it just makes it fun. You just embrace and you keep growing. It never stops. It never stops, man.
I know. That's the crazy thing, man, is it literally never stops. Yeah, you can be a musician for 2,000 years and still shedding 8 hours a day.
Yeah. I think about that.
That's why music's the best.
With kids too. Like, because I know with Nigel, it's like every day, and Kavi too, like you see some new development. But then I thought, well, my parents, however old they were, I guess in their 70s, when me and Kofi were in our 40s, and then we came home with 2 Grammys. And it's like, wow, when Nigel's 40 something, he'll still be blowing my mind. He'll still be surprising me. Like, it literally never stops, ever.
It's true.
Awesome.
Totally true.
That's a good thing.
Eric, thank you so much, man. Obviously, you're going to come back. We have to do this again.
Yeah, man. I'd love to have, I've had Oteil. I'd love to have both you guys on. I mean, Oteil for a second time. I'd love to have you on my show too. But yeah, man, I appreciate you guys having me on. And I appreciate what you guys are doing, man. It's been inspiring to listen to your guys' podcast and all the guests and everything. So yeah, it's a pleasure.
Yes, ours is turning into the psychedelic mental health UFO podcast. Like,
yes.
.edu.
I love all of that. So that's perfect.
Well, we love you, man. And we love you, all the listeners out there. And
go check out everything Kraz, everybody.
Much appreciated, fellas.
Peace.